Hello. Hello. Today I will be presenting on Chapter 9 of Paul Pintrick and Dale Chunk's book, Motivation and Education, Theory, Research, and Applications. Chapter 9, titled Teacher and Classroom Influences on Student Motivation and Perceived Self-Efficacy, aims to complicate and expand the accepted beliefs about teacher influence on student motivation and perception of self-efficacy. The main argument that the authors put forth is that it is through reciprocal interactions that students and teachers inform and influence each other's cognition, behavior, and environmental factors. In other words, teachers and students mutually inform each other's practices related to teaching and learning. This is the main argument and must therefore be kept in mind throughout the entirety of this lesson. This chapter is broken down to three parts. Part A, teacher planning and decision making. Part B, instructional practices. And Part C, teacher-student interactions. We will explore in more depth each of these sections. Let's begin with Section A. Section A, teacher planning and decision making, with the first subsection being models of planning and decision making. What's important to note here is that the authors are expanding on students' influence on teachers' teaching. In other words, they contend that teachers' lesson planning and classroom organization strategies are fluid, dynamic, and continuous. What's important, for example, in the movie Freedom Writers, teacher Erin Gruel creates the line activity to facilitate bonding and sharing of life experiences among her students. After noticing her students would only hang out with peers of their own racial and ethnic groups, this teacher adapted her lesson to enable collaboration and strengthen the sense of community within her classroom. Her teaching, therefore, is seen as fluid, dynamic, and continuous, influenced by the students' needs and motivation. The second part to Section A is instructional grouping. There are three types of instructional grouping that teachers can implement within the classroom. The first is competitive, the second is cooperative, and the third is individualistic. Let's begin with competitive. Competitive instructional grouping emphasizes ability attainment rather than critical problem solving or effort. It also enforces social comparison. Through competition, students are forced to compare themselves with their fellow peers, which therefore creates motivation. Motivation is enhanced only when students perceive themselves to perform better than others. It's important to note that failure in competitive instructional grouping is the most harmful of all three types of instructional grouping. The second type of instructional grouping is cooperative. Cooperative learning and instructional grouping promotes collective learning and communal knowledge. Students share in successes and failures. It's a group effort. Its individual responsibility affects the group as a whole. Therefore, group outcome is the influence on individual students' perceptions of these capabilities. And lastly, we have the individualistic instructional grouping. This individualistic instructional grouping promotes self-regulation and self-betterment. Here you see Tina Fey's character on Dirty Rock high-fiving herself because, really, the rewards are based on self-improvement. Motivation and perceptions of self-efficacy are dependent on perceptions of individual improvement and progress. Let's move on to Section B, instructional practices. The first subsection being effective teaching. Here you see the Rosenshine and Stevens 1986 fundamental instructional functions. These are the ways that teaching can be effective regardless of students. You begin with reviewing of relevant knowledge, checking the previous day's work, and reteaching if necessary. You then move on to presenting the new material, which is listed as number 2. Number 3, you provide guided practice for this new material while ensuring to check for understanding. Next, you provide feedback on this guided practice and you reteach if needed. And lastly, you end by giving students independent practice to reinforce and make concrete this new learning. You have to make sure to then brush up and review all this learning within spaced intervals. The second part of instructional practices is the use of models or modeling behavior. Both teachers and peers serve as models within the classroom. First, teachers serve as models by modeling thinking and learning processes. They also provide information on why learning is important. It is peers who serve as models as well because of the developmental similarity to the student. This allows for positive social comparison. For instance, a student may be thinking, if my peers can succeed, so can I. Lastly, we move into our final section, teacher-student interactions, with the first subsection being teacher feedback. Teacher feedback is split up into 4 subcategories, with the first being performance feedback. Performance feedback is feedback given on competency as well as corrective measures needed to be taken. It validates students' capabilities to learn, relearn, and progress throughout the learning process. Second comes motivational feedback. Motivational feedback's main function is to get students to work on tasks, as well as to maintain productive focus and engagement. Motivational feedback is successful if reinforced through performance feedback, which we explained above. For an example of motivational feedback, it could be done through social comparison, as well as persuasive encouragement. For instance, a teacher could tell her student, "I know you can do this because you are just as smart and hardworking as your peers." Here you see Edna Mode from the Pixar movie The Incredibles, totally saying that she does not need evaluation because she's that great. Other 2 subcategories of teacher feedback are attributional feedback, which attribute difficulties in learning to controllable factors such as effort, and de-emphasize ability. Therefore, teachers give attributional feedback when they praise the student's effort and not their actual ability. Another form of teacher feedback is strategy feedback. This informs learners on how they are applying a strategy and how that strategy improves their performance. Strategy feedback is actually a form of attributional feedback because it links outcomes with the use of the strategy. Therefore, you can see the strategy as a sort of effort. The second section is rewards. Rewards are seen to celebrate and validate performance. They also symbolize progress. Rewards increase student interest and motivation by promoting students' perceptions of learning, progress, and self-efficacy. Here, we note that within the GIF that is failing to pop up on the screen, you can see a young girl Please hold. So we left off our rewards, and I was going to explain this GIF of Vivienne, who talks about not even liking dancing, which is in a dance competition, but only being there because her mom said she would buy her tacos. In this example, tacos are the reward that motivate Vivienne to dance or to do whatever her mother says. The next part is classroom climate. Teacher-student interactions are molded by the type of teacher leadership within the classroom. The first is authoritarian, which is attributed with high productivity, but only when the authority or the teacher is present. It also produces stress and other negative emotions to the students. The second type of leadership is laissez-faire, which basically is no rules, low productivity because there is no leadership, collaboration and consensus not promoted or facilitated. Lastly, democratic, which is task-oriented, cooperative, and friendly, and it promotes independence and initiative. Democratic classroom climate is the most successful. Although it may be less efficient because it takes a little bit more time than authoritarian, it promotes more positive learning processes, such as critical problem solving and collaboration. Classroom climate and specifically democratic classroom climate, can be fostered through collaboration and cooperation. It could be fostered by asking students what their preference for activity or evaluation is and implementing that input, encouraging and facilitating critical thinking, ensuring students acknowledge and respect the teacher and the leadership, and overall that they maintain an open mind to the dynamics of the classroom. These are the ways to apply democratic leadership principles. Our fourth section of teacher-student interactions is praise versus criticism. Praise conveys positive teacher affect, which is the main reason for why praise goes beyond regular feedback. Overall, praise is a weak reinforcer, especially after the first few grades in school. The efficacy of praise varies by grade level, socioeconomic status, and ability. Although it may have a weak correlation, it is a reinforcement overall. It serves to inform on desirability and accuracy of responses, as well as motivate students to expect and value reinforcement. Effective praise is characterized by a variety of things, such as credibility and sincerity, specificity, declarative statements, calling attention to the progress and effort of the students, backing up verbal praise with nonverbal praise, praising individual students privately so as to avoid classroom disruption or public embarrassment. It also makes it more intimate and personal of the praise you're giving. Now let's move on to criticism. Criticism provides information about undesirability of behaviors. Here I have a GIF of judges from America's Next Top Model. In the show, the criticism or constructive criticism is meant to improve and motivate the participants. Effective criticism, as I said, motivates students. It informs students on the value of learning and provides information on progress towards goals. Our last part is unsolicited help. Unsolicited help is help that is not asked for. It has both pros and cons. The pros are that, well, the teachers are helping the students learn. This improves the students' perception of progress, which in turn increases motivation and self-efficacy. The con, however, is that unsolicited help could make students doubt their capabilities and competencies. In other words, the students may believe that teachers see them as needing help or needing more guidance than the rest of their peers. This ends this lesson on teacher and classroom influences on student behavior. Thank you.